Hey friends, welcome back to the Good Life Podcast, a show for women in midlife who want to live happier, healthier, and more meaningful lives. I'm your host, Michele. I'm a speaker, author, and empowerment coach. And today's conversation is all about hair loss. With over 30 million women in the United States alone experiencing female pattern hair loss, I think this is an important conversation. And if you've noticed that you've had your hair thinning or have already experienced hair loss, and this conversation is for you. Joining us today is Dr. Bauman, who is a board-certified hair restoration physician with over 28 years of experience in the medical field. He is the founder and CEO of Bauman Medical, which is an international leading treatment center in the field of hair restoration. Now, Dr. Bauman has focused a lot of his work on hereditary male and female pattern hair loss, and he's established himself as an authority in the industry, having treated over 34,000 patients, having done over 12,000 hair transplant surgeries, and having administered over 12,000 PRP hair regrowth treatments. Dr. Bauman is one of approximately only 200 physicians worldwide to achieve the certification from the esteemed American Board of Hair Restoration Surgery. This is such a fascinating conversation. Be sure to share it with a friend. And on that note, let's get into the show. Here we go. Dr. Bauman, I sometimes think we can get people onto the moon, and yet we have no clue how to reverse hair loss, do we? In a way where maybe there's, where it's universal and accessible to everyone. I'll say it like that.
Yes. Well, I think, hair loss is a very pervasive problem. It's stumped medical professionals for the ages. I think Hippocrates was the first maybe who was trying to invent a hair loss cure. And that's what drove him into the field of medicine, perhaps. And, he became the father of modern medicine. But no, the good news is that today, actually, we have some very effective treatment modalities. Now, of course, are they accessible to everyone? That's all relative, of course. But the good news is that hair loss treatments and procedures have changed so dramatically over the past 5-10 years. It's unbelievable. The field is virtually unrecognizable compared to when I started almost 30 years ago.
Okay. Well, I actually was curious because I read your bio and you were trained as a surgeon. What made you go specifically into becoming a hair restoration surgeon? Was there something that prompted that decision?
Yeah, absolutely. And so, I was mentored by a very prominent plastic surgeon at a pretty much young age, before I could drive a car. And I always thought after that experience that plastic surgery, cosmetic procedures, improving form and function of the body was something that I always wanted to do. And I pursued, obviously, through medical school, externships in cosmetic surgery and plastic surgery. And then my general surgery internship and residency was geared towards that. And I didn't really know anything about a hair transplant, essentially. You never come across that in plastic surgery, at least certainly not in the 1990s, until I had met someone who had the procedure done. Now, he was going to have something else done cosmetically, and in his medical history, there was the mention of a hair transplant. And we got to chatting, and I was intrigued by the idea because I'd seen my dad lose his hair and the struggles that he went through.
Yes.
I never met my grandfather with hair, so
Yes.
I knew that there was a possibility that this baldness might be coming my way. So I was certainly intrigued by it. The amazing thing that happened was a very short conversation with this gentleman. After I noticed that his hair transplant looked amazing. I mean, it didn't look like a hair transplant, and he was obviously excited about that he fooled the doctor, that, this upcoming surgeon, that it was basically undetectable. So we got to talking about that, how he chose his surgeon, why he chose and went to where he did. And from a layman's point of view about the technology, which was just coming of age, really single follicle implantation done with an artistic approach to create something that looked normal and natural. And that was certainly not what I expected to see. I was just like everybody else in the 1990s. I guess I thought plugs were painful and obvious, painfully obvious too.
Yes.
Right. And so why would anybody want to do that? It certainly wasn't like that. And then the other thing that we talked about was how it changed his life. And I remember that conversation very vividly about how socially and professionally, after the hair restoration, his life was never the same again. And so much more for the better, obviously. And So it was at that point, I'm like, well, maybe I should look into this. This looks pretty interesting. I understood that it was artistic and microsurgical and also life changing, like cosmetic procedures could be. And so that started me on this like path less well traveled, I guess,
Yes.
investigating and going to conferences, obviously reading a lot on journals and textbooks, but finding new mentors in the field of hair restoration that really took me under their wing and eventually doing a fellowship in hair transplants. And it really, instead of just adding it to a plastic surgery repertoire or menu of things, I decided to do it full tilt, basically
Right.
100%. So that's kind of the short version of the story of how I got into hair transplantation. And it seems like it just seems like yesterday. It was a quick, 26, 27 years that went by.
Wow, it's amazing. And I always think it's interesting why somebody chooses the field that they're in. And with the field that you're in too, I think there's people just don't really understand that much about hair, right? But it's so important. Like you said, you watched your dad, you never met your grandfather without hair. I think, my
With it,
shows
right?
with hair, sorry.
Yeah,
That's right, but with hair.
yeah.
And for women, in particular, my shows for midlife women, if you go get a blowout or you get your hair done, you feel like you can take on the world. Hair is so personal. It makes somebody
Mm.
feel good about themselves, and so there's a vulnerability that occurs. I was looking at a picture of what my hair looked like a year after even my daughter was born. There's a significant difference. And so I think today what would be helpful is to understand, you know, just let's understand hair. What's the cycle? What are the causes? We'll go into it and then get into the treatments. But let's start with specifically tell us about hair.
You captured it beautifully. Hair is a very emotional organ, right? When your hair looks amazing, you feel great, you look great.
Do.
You could,
Yeah.
as you said, you take on the world, and that's true for both men and for women.
Yeah.
When hair loss occurs, obviously, that we know through just talking to average everyday people, it can be a traumatic situation. It can really impact quality of life. If
Yeah.
you're having a bad hair day due to hair loss, well, that bad hair day can turn into a bad hair week or a bad hair life. And, just a couple of weeks ago, there was a report of a gentleman from India who committed suicide due to his hair loss. So,
Mm.
and that's obviously a very extreme situation. But it just goes to show that, hair is a very important part of our human experience. And I think evolutionarily, we've been just, ingrained, our lizard brain has been ingrained to be able to make a snap judgment, for better or for worse, of whether that person, caveman or cavewoman, is going to make a good mate
Yes.
for us and help us
Yes.
propagate the species. And so we can't ignore it's part of youth and vitality, and that's what hair really brings. So if we get down to the microscience, the hair follicle is an amazing organ. I mean, it's tiny. You're born with about 150,000 of them on your scalp. And their job, like a 3D printer, is to produce this beautiful, hopefully thick and luscious head of hair, literally one strand at a time, right? And
Yes.
so the fiber that you see is dead tissue. It's keratinized tissue, like your fingernails.
Hmm.
The hair follicle is a highly metabolic organ. In fact, it's the most highly mitotic, or that means, the most cellular division is occurring per minute at the level of the hair follicle, in the root of the hair, the dermal papilla, to create this hair strand. And even as your listeners tune in today, over the course of just 1 hour, if they have a healthy head of hair, if you multiply the amount of hair follicles that they have, 150,000 hair follicles, about 85% of them are in the growing phase at any given time, producing about, let's say, a third of a millimeter of hair a day, or quarter of an inch to half an inch a month.
Yeah.
That equates to about 6 feet of hair in just an hour podcast. So
Oh my God, we had no
you were
idea.
yeah, you didn't know that you were
No.
dedicating so much energy. Your body is dedicating so much energy. So
Yes.
the point of me bringing that up is the fact that because it's such a highly metabolic cell population, it becomes a very strong barometer of our health and wellness, right? Because over time, if we're nutritionally deficient, if we're stressed out, if we're have a whole body inflammation going on, if we're not getting adequate sleep, or we're jet lagged, or if we have some kind of metabolic condition that's affecting our circulation and so forth, all of that, hormone imbalance, you name it, all of that can affect the hair follicles in some way, shape, or form.
Wow.
And of course, everybody kind of knows it's not just the shedding in the shower that you might see, but it's a change in the texture of the hair or breakage that you see, your change in hair volume, a receding hairline. And that's true, for both men and for women. That, the female hair follicle is a little bit more sensitive, I would say, to many of these things than the male hair follicles. But basically, there's the underlying genetic causes of hair loss. And that's where everything kind of starts. Your mom's side or your dad's side, or both.
Okay. And this may be a silly question, but I've always wondered, does one side of the family, like does the dad side pass it down to the daughter and the mom side pass it to the son, or does it work like that? Like how does the genetic piece work?
Yeah, I think it's an old wives' tale that it's the mom's dad that determines your hair loss situation. Because certainly today we know there are literally hundreds of genetic locations, right? Single nucleotide polymorphisms is the technical term, SNPs, and those are the things that determine metabolic pathways to good quality hair and also hair loss and which treatments you'll respond to. So, I don't want to jump ahead to DNA testing for hair loss, but often that's done to figure out what kind of therapies you might respond to better and what are these genetic influences. So it's not just one side of the family. We know that you're getting DNA from both,
That's fascinating. I'll going to make a note because I want to loop back to that. But tell us about what are the main causes of hair loss. I mean, you started talking about nutritional deficiencies and, maybe even autoimmune. There's might be things that are contributing, but what
Absolutely.
let's break down what could cause hair loss.
Yeah. So, well, first of all, in the practice, we do see both men and women. About nearly 40% of my patients are women. So we do have a very, very strong knowledge about, having treated over 30,000 patients. We know that there's a wide range of causes, but primarily it starts with the DNA, with the genetics, as we said. So typical male pattern hair loss is easy to see. You see the receding hairline, some thinning in the crown, and it can progress to total loss across the top of the scalp and leaving behind the hair around the sides and the back intact.
Right.
So it's pretty interesting the way that Mother Nature has kind of designed that.
Yeah.
In women, it can be a little bit different. We can see hair loss happening after childbirth. We can see it around the time of menopause. We can see it during times of changes in nutrition. For example, if you're trying to lose weight or change your diet structure, your nutrients and fuel composition all can affect your hair. And so we do see it. Sometimes there's hormone imbalance in women around the time of childbearing age in terms of PCOS, polycystic ovarian syndrome, as I mentioned, childbirth, menopause, and so forth. But female hair loss, female hereditary hair loss looks a little bit different. And this is why sometimes, and I think that maybe women don't get the respect that they deserve from the dermatologists locally, because, you look at someone who has female pattern hair loss and it's not necessarily so detectable with the naked eye like it is with men. Oh, you have plenty of hair. You've got coverage. But that's not what women want. Women don't just want coverage. They want the volume, the fullness, the thicker ponytail. They don't want to see that widening part line. And female hair loss can happen, hereditary female hair loss can happen diffusely in the frontal zone or around the frame of the face. Eventually, it can cause a recession of the hairline, but usually it's a little bit later on. But women notice that change in their ponytail volume and their change in their coverage and the volume first, and the shedding and the drain, the shower, and so forth.
Okay, this is so
but
good.
Yeah, so what are the other causes, right? You mentioned nutritional status. So today, on the tip of everyone's tongue is the GLP-1 agonists, the Ozempic weight loss. And if you are nutritionally deficient, you're caloric restricted, or you're not absorbing well, you have a malabsorption syndrome, you're not going to grow good hair, at least not the way that it used to be. And so if you've had bariatric surgery or you're on a caloric restrictive diet, you commonly do fasting, you may see more hair loss occur. And it can accelerate that natural female pattern or male pattern of loss because those follicles are highly sensitive to the amounts of nutrients and fuel. If you're anemic, you're not going to be transporting enough oxygen directly to the follicles to burn that fuel, to create that protein fiber. So that may be an issue. Thyroid is another hormone that we don't know everything there is to know about how the thyroid imbalance affects the hair. But there's actually a term called thyroid hair that makes your hair look a little bit drier, a little bit less shiny, a little bit more dull, a little bit more lifeless. And so thyroid hair can be a big problem, as well as shortening the growth cycles of hair.
Okay, this is so helpful. Let's actually, I was going to save it for a little bit later since you mentioned it twice now, the DNA testing. So is that something you do in your office, or is that something
Yeah.
accessible to people? Like who would, if you felt like you were losing your hair, who would you seek out? Obviously, someone with your expertise would be the ideal, but I think, like you said, a lot of people do go to their dermatologist.
Yeah, unfortunately today, I mean, what's happened is that over the past 20 years, the amount of knowledge in the field of hair restoration has exploded exponentially. And this is not something that your typical dermatologist is going to have access to
Yeah.
because look, to be honest, they're busy doing other things. They're looking for cancer. They're treating your acne, your rosacea, and things like that. At the level of the scalp, there's so many things that can dysregulate your hair. Even inflammation and itching and dryness or oiliness of the scalp can cause seborrheic dermatitis. And you mentioned autoimmune conditions and such. So these are all things that we want to keep an eye out for. So seeking out a board certified hair restoration physician, ABHRS are those initials, American Board of Hair Restoration Surgery. I'm sure we'll put it in the show links.
For sure.
That's a group of physicians. There's only maybe a couple of hundred in the world that are board certified in hair restoration.
Wow.
And then you look at the International Alliance of Hair Restoration Surgeons. Those are surgeons that have been handpicked by third-party organizations like the American Hair Loss Association and the Bald Truth and places like that, where they vet the surgeons based on their experience, expertise, ethics, artistry, and things like that, technology. And there's only maybe 100 of those doctors in the world. And we're talking out
Wow.
of thousands and thousands of hair surgeons. And that
Wow.
doesn't even count, hundreds of thousands of dermatologists, right?
Yes.
So finding a specialist is really important because we have access to tools that you may not have. You mentioned DNA testing. Look, people can go to my e-store and buy a DNA test. Will they be able to interpret it themselves? It depends. It's
Yeah.
not so simple.
Yeah.
And the results change. So, having me there with you to interpret your DNA tests will help you understand what are the most important parts of that DNA to know when it comes to your treatment regimen.
Mm.
And so you have to use the clinical picture with the DNA test and put that together to get to the best results for our patients. When a patient comes into the office, for example, we might do an AI-powered microscope exam of their scalp. It literally counts the hairs and sorts the hairs based on their caliber. So we
Wow.
can determine each different zone, what's going on in each area at the moment of the consultation to help support the diagnosis, but also in the long run to be able to track that person over time to know what treatments are working much more quickly than just looking in the mirror and taking a guess, right? Or counting the hairs in the drain. We'll know exactly which areas are responding to the treatments, the modalities, and how well you're responding. And also, like a treatment, for example, that we do in the office, like either transepidermal delivery growth factors called TED, or treatment like PRP, which is very popular in many
Yeah.
clinics and med spas. How many treatments do you need to get to the result? And then when do you need to repeat that? Well, you don't want to repeat it after you've lost all the result. You want to repeat it at your peak so that you can continue to improve or maintain that result.
Okay. So blood tests worth asking for. I mean, you mentioned thyroid. There's got to be some that, that maybe it's maybe a starting place for the women listening. Anything that they could at least be
Well,
asking for?
when indicated, of course, we're going to look at the biomarkers for sure. And
Yes.
in my practice, I'm pretty lucky. I'm blessed. I've got a large team of people. I have my own functional medicine department inside Bauman Medical.
Oh, cool.
So if we have an idea that there may be something going on, let's do some lab work. Let's see what's going on, right? We mentioned hormone evaluations. We mentioned everything from thyroid to testosterone. We can look at your anemia profile. We can look at autoimmune markers, things like that. Even maybe saliva testing to look at your cortisol curve, right? Because if your
Mm.
cortisol is staying high over the course of the evening, afternoon or evening, then that's not so good for hair growth either. That may indicate that something else needs to be addressed. So yeah, there's a lot of biomarkers and root cause that we get to when it comes to hair loss if we need to. Now, a young man, 25 years old with some recession of the hairline, who's a professional athlete, he may not necessarily need the blood work, okay? But we may want to look at his lifestyle factors and see if he's burning the candle at both ends, and so to speak, in terms of nutrition and metabolic status. Weightlifters and high intensity athletes do sometimes have trouble growing hair.
Okay. And you mentioned women going through menopause. So talk to us about perimenopause and menopause, because this is an audience of midlife women. So what are we seeing?
Sure.
What's going on for us?
So around the time of menopause, as you know, hormones are changing, and hair follicles are a very hormonally sensitive organ.
Okay.
We know, like, for example, in men, we know that DHT, dihydrotestosterone, which is the metabolite of testosterone, is the primary trigger for male pattern hair loss. And we think that sometimes an imbalance in women can sometimes lead to this, if they have androgen sensitivity, they might
Yes.
have a developing male pattern or male looking pattern of hair loss, meaning a receding part of the hairline. And that is the same term. Androgenetic alopecia is the same male and female pattern. That's the same
Interesting.
diagnosis, actually. It just looks different in both men and women. And so as those hormones change, a woman might experience increased shedding. She might experience changes in her hair quality, her texture, the caliber of the hair. And also, what I find very often is that women come in and complain of breakage, and they think that, oh my God, my hair is like snapping off, it's breaking. And while that could be true due to, let's say, chemicals application, like, perms
Yes.
and color, or high heat, which is sometimes combined with straightening treatments and such, or even
Yes.
regular styling, it's usually not like a tree branch that grew and then all of a sudden snapped off at the end.
Hmm.
Usually what happens is that growth cycle is interrupted, and then the hair grows back in a much shorter length.
Oh, permanently?
Well, it can happen with each successive growth cycle. That hair might grow shorter and shorter and shorter. So instead of, let's say, spending 5 to 7 years in the growing phase, which would be a ponytail length, right? Now that hair follicle turned off, and the next growing phase is a shorter length of time. Maybe it's a year. And then the next year, it's just a few months. And then the next year, it's just a few weeks.
Oh,
And
wow.
eventually, you end up with these follicles that are miniaturized, essentially, not just in their thickness and the caliber, but also in terms of how much time they spend in the growing phase. And so if you end up with a follicle that's producing a hair that's invisible to the naked eye, less than 2 millimeters and thinner than 30 microns, that's like the hair on your cheek. You're not going to see it. It's not going to
No.
help you with coverage. So the idea is to take some
No.
action ahead of time. So yes, so we do those evaluations? Yes. We get the history. Are you on hormone optimization therapy or not? Is that including testosterone therapy? Because that could be a risk for some women.
Risk in what way? Too much testosterone is it a problem? Because like you mentioned, the androgen. So is that
Yes.
okay? So
If you're androgen sensitive, and
yes.
that's again hereditarily passed along,
And you
you
know
may
that
not
from the
even
DNA testing. I don't mean to interrupt you, but just so women understand, how are you connecting these dots, right? Is it from that?
we could do it from the DNA testing to see what metabolic pathways are affecting androgen production.
Yes.
But androgen sensitivity is sometimes a clinical diagnosis, meaning that you have a little bit of a recession of
Ah,
the
you see it.
hairline
Yeah.
or thinning around the frame of the face.
Yeah.
So we can identify, let's say you have high density, high quality in the back of the scalp. That's called the occipital zone. And then we do a measurement in the frontal zone with that AI powered microscope, and we see less density, weaker quality hair, or we see visually shorter hairs. That tells us that those areas are androgen sensitive.
Mm.
And if you take someone who's a little bit androgen sensitive and then you replace testosterone, that could accelerate the hair loss
Oh,
situation.
wow.
So it's very, very tricky, not impossible, because it's important to replace the hormone. I believe it's important for hormone to replace the hormones, and we very often do that, in the clinic in our functional medicine department. But we also want to protect the hair at the same time,
This is
and
so
both men and
fascinating.
women,
This is
men and women.
fascinating. And I love that you have the functional medicine department too, because you're getting to root cause. A lot of what I'm taking away is that it's very tailored. It's very specific. It's not this is what you have, this is what you're going to get. We're going to, right?
Well,
It's a little more tailored
the
to the
buzzwords,
person.
100%. The buzzwords are personalized and precision. I mean, that's the
Personalized.
kind of medicine
Yes.
that we're doing today. Look, years and years ago, you had a large cohort of all different types of people, and you applied some kind of treatment, and you figured out what the average person responds in the average way. And that's how things get FDA approved. But what we
Yes.
realize today that we are unique individuals, and the DNA plays an important role. And it doesn't determine our destiny, but it does play an important role in terms of these potential pathways. And it opens our eyes into these areas that we need to investigate and see what's going on.
Yeah. Okay. I have some specific questions before we go to treatment and getting into that a little bit, because you mentioned, for example, styling. So I think women wonder, is it bad to wash my hair every day? Is it bad to blow dry my hair every day? I'm pulling on the brown brush using heat, like you mentioned. Talk to us about, hair coloring. I just threw a lot at you, but what are we doing that maybe we should temper a bit, if
Okay.
anything?
So, well,
Yes,
let's work from the scalp our way outward. So
please.
the scalp is like skin. In fact, it is skin. And so you should treat it carefully. If you have inflammation at the level of the scalp, and that could be a sensitivity to a product or fragrance or an oil, it's going to create inflammation, and inflammation is not friendly to the hair follicles. So if your scalp hurts or it's irritated or it's itchy or it looks inflamed or it has a pimple or, that's something that needs to be addressed, because that could be exacerbating your hair loss situation for sure.
Okay.
And you may not know. What do you think is the most popular shampoo in the world?
The dandruff shampoo.
Yes, Head and Shoulders. You
Yeah.
are correct.
I've read that somewhere.
So they sell 100 bottles a minute or something like that.
What?
100
Wow.
bottles a minute. Yeah, worldwide. And so that's at least what I've been told. And when I did a little bit of work with Procter and Gamble. But the astounding part of that is that so many people have some kind of scalp issue, right? So it could be, again, as we said, something you're applying to the scalp, maybe just like your face. How often should you wash your face? I mean, there's a variety of different opinions on that.
Right.
Why? Because everybody's skin is a little bit different. And what worked 10 years ago may not work 10 years from now.
Right.
So because our skin changes, right? Our oil production, our moisture level changes, our pH level changes, our environment changes. What we do to our scalp changes in terms of color and straightening and other therapies and treatments that we do to style our hair, right?
Yes.
So actually, I'm very, very keen on the microbiome of the scalp. That's the environment where the microbes live.
Yes.
Because we know today, if there's a dysregulation of the microbiome and overproduction of this malathesia, which is a microorganism that's like fungus, then all of a sudden you're getting the seborrheic dermatitis. It's feeding off of the oil and the skin exfoliated from the scalp and causing a lot of disruption. So that's not so good.
Wow.
So I have an entire department geared towards the health of the scalp, and that's called trichology, TRICH, trichology. And that's the study of hair and scalp. So just like an esthetician would help a surgeon, plastic surgeon, I have a trichologist who helps me as a hair transplant surgeon keep the scalps healthy. So pulling and tugging is a thing that we often see people do.
Every
now,
day.
Look, as you may know, that there's an OCD disease, literally an obsessive compulsive condition where people pluck out their hairs.
I've seen that with eyebrows. They do it from their scalp too.
Yes. So it can happen with eyebrows and eyelashes as well. It's more common in women than in men, but that permanently damages the follicle. If you pluck out a hair again and again and again, think of that overplucked eyebrow. It does not come back.
Yeah.
And so, a lot of those patients need eyebrow transplants. So mistreating your hair with tight braids or attaching wigs and weaves or even heavy extensions can be a risk factor for some people. So you'll never hear me forbid hair color or extensions for patients, but I do make them aware that there's no safe cigarette. These are risk factors that you need to be aware of, and you need to be smart about it. And you need to have a conversation with your stylist if you're going to move forward with those things. How can we color our hair more gently so that it doesn't degrade the protein so that we get hair breakage, right? How can we use extensions to make us look great for a wedding or a special event or going out for dinner, but yet not create hair damage in our most permanent area of follicles in case sometime we need hair transplants in the future?
Right. It's still taken from here in the back.
Correct. So all of that is part of our discussion. Maybe you should have a smoothing treatment instead of a Brazilian blowout. Okay. Because a Brazilian blowout is this super high heat and like heavy duty chemicals that totally degrade the hair fiber. Just like, think about it. The fiber does not self repair. You cannot really repair the fiber once its cuticle, its coating is degraded.
Really?
And Yeah. And so if you damage your hair, you have to wait for a new one to grow. That's how that works.
It's not going to be healed with something, right? Like a lotion
Right.
for the hair. That doesn't
Yeah.
work.
I mean, there's some chemical treatments like, K18 and some other things, smoothing and things like that can help, fill in the gaps. But really, once a hair fiber is damaged, it's not really going to be repaired. The cuticle is like a row of like fish scales, right? And they're lined up in a very certain in the direction of the hair growth, right? And then if the scales kind of peel up and away from the hair fiber, it
Yes.
becomes more permeable to moisture and more susceptible to breakage. And it's
Okay.
going to look more dull. It's not going to look shiny anymore. So the hair is going to lose its aesthetic value.
Yeah. It's tricky though, because some women choose to go gray. I don't think I will ever be that woman. But I will tell you, I do find that every time I go get my hair colored, I feel like I lose a little bit of my hairline up here. So it's like, wait, do I want more hair or do I want it, darker? So
Well,
is it a trade-off? I mean,
no, Michele, come on. You can have your cake and eat it too. I mean, look, we don't have a cure for gray hair, although we have some therapies that have there's some data that shows that it may repigment the hair follicle. We're involved with some of this cutting edge research in the University of Miami right now on a variety of different anti-aging ingredients that have an effect at the level of the hair follicle that we've
wow.
been able to show in the petri dish, essentially. How
Wow.
well that translates to the clinic, we're working on it. So stay
Yeah.
tuned.
Yeah.
Um, but there are therapies that do say that if the follicle is not completely depigmented, that therapies that improve hair growth can improve hair color and protect hair color. And it's an important question that often is asked in the clinic. What are we doing about my gray hair? Um, but yeah, there's the good news is that you can do treatments to protect you. If you know that you're at risk or you've seen some little bit of hair loss, the good news, Michele, is that you can protect the hair that you have. And there's a lot of variety of therapies and treatments. Once we've identified some of those risk factors and influences, let's get into the therapies and treatments that really move the needle, get those follicles to stick around, to grow better, thicker, better, stronger hair.
Okay, so I think we covered, so maybe we should go to the treatment. So let me just ask quickly though, because sometimes the
Yeah.
stylist will leave, you'll see like the color sitting on the scalp. And I'm like, can you just wash that off? I feel like that's not good. Or like I'll go wash my hair, a month later, and I feel like there's still color coming off the scalp. That's probably not good for the scalp that it's sitting there.
No, it's probably not good, health wise for the scalp to have, whatever that product is, God
Yeah.
knows,
What do
sitting
you
on the scalp.
like? I didn't mean to interrupt. So finish that, but tell us what you like. Like, what do you say for a woman who does, you said
Well,
gentler.
I think I would just say, have that discussion with your professional stylist and colorist to say, listen, especially if you're feeling some kind of irritation at the time of the treatment, whether it's you're doing a perm or you're doing a color, if it's hurting you, please, you must speak up because there's inflammation going on. So please don't ignore your scalp if it's telling you something.
Okay.
Um, there may be other types of colors like non-ammonia. There's more pigments and dyes that may be more gentle to the skin. But the point is that when the color sticks to your skin cosmetically, that has a little bit of a benefit because if you're the type of person who's noticing the scalp shining through, you have dark hair, light skin, and you've done color. Now there's a little bit of that residue. It actually makes it look better. And
Maybe.
for those who are listening, I did air quotes on that. So, it's going to look better. It doesn't necessarily mean it is better.
Okay.
So that's my point.
Before we go to treatments, actually, I did have one question. Why is our hair so gorgeous and thick when we're pregnant? That third
Mm.
trimester, oh my goodness, that hair, I mean, never looked so good. What is
Yeah,
that?
so I have some ideas on that. So, there's not that much science, to be honest, to support it. But let's think about it. What's going on in the body at that moment? Raging hormones, right? Hormones level through the roof, right? To support the growth of the baby
Yeah.
and the placenta and all the other extra tissue that you need, the uterus and so forth, is growing like gangbusters. And so the hormone levels are very, very elevated. So if you just think, okay, maybe it's hormones, the hormones are affecting the hair throughout your body, and the hair is being kept in that growing phase. There's something that's telling the follicle, don't turn off and shed that hair. Just keep it growing. So turn on and
Mm.
go. Today, I have another, and if you'd asked me 20 years ago, I probably would have said that.
Okay.
Today, I have another idea. because there's some interesting research on parabiosis. I don't know if you're familiar with this, where they take an old rat and a young rat and they connect the blood supplies. And what happens is that when the old rat and the young rat share a blood supply, something very interesting happens. The younger rat can actually get diseases of old age, but the older rat actually reverses in terms of their aging markers.
Wow.
Their fur grows better, the gray goes away. So maybe there's some kind of intimate communication at a nanoparticle level. I'm talking about exosomes for those who are listening and know that term. Those are the chemical messages that come from cells. Maybe there's some kind of symbiotic discussion going on at a chemical level between the fetus that's growing and developing and the mom. Because look, it's not just your hair, right? Isn't it your skin also?
Everything.
Don't you just look a little bit different? Your skin looks a little bit brighter. I remember when my wife was pregnant. I have two boys, they're 21, 23. But I remember, beautiful, gorgeous. You could tell just by looking at her right away, something is going on inside. And so maybe that has something to do with it. I don't know if we can prove it or not, but that's just my theory. That it's a parabiosis, that the young blood from the fetus is having this effect. Think about the time and exposure, and you said third trimester, right? So why is the third trimester? It looks amazing because you've had 8 months of that exposure to that young blood, right?
Yeah,
or,
it is definitely
whatever
that last
that's being
trimester you
shared,
notice it.
right?
That's fascinating. That feels like, when you say that, it resonates. Like, it feels right what you're saying, even if the science isn't there to maybe yet. And
there is some studies. There are biohackers out there that are like, getting young serum, spun down from their progeny, from their son, and injecting it into themselves, and watching their biomarkers. So this is something that people are actually experimenting with. There are treatments where you can have your blood like literally like washed, like you're in a treatment. It comes out of your body, it goes through a process, and is reapplied back into your body. And then, we don't have exosomes for total body rejuvenation like that yet. I think the data is still unclear, but I think there are people working on that.
Yeah, I think I saw someone do a post. It may have been even one of the sharks from Shark Tank doing something in Dubai or something with that blood cleaning. I want to say it was one of those. Yes, I saw that. I was like, there's a lot of cool stuff going on out there. Okay, well, let's talk, since we covered so many, causes, and it sounds like the most common is the genetic component, both for men and women. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, absolutely. Look, genetics, and then, you have those other factors like tuning up your sleep and your nutrition. And so there are, in my opinion, supplements that are effective for hair regrowth.
Yeah.
People should know that if you're protein deficient, and there are certain folks that are at risk for that. You look at vegans and vegetarian diets, they may be they're much lower in protein intake than if you were just eating, lamb chops and steak and hamburgers, right? So you have to be very keen on how much protein you're getting. So I'm a huge fan of collagen protein, and there's some really good collagen peptides. We have under the Bauman brand one that specifically is been shown to improve the collagen production at the level of the skin, but even more importantly, hair growth. So we call that the builder. But there's, the nutrients come with fuel, and fuel comes with nutrients. So you need to make sure you have the right vitamins and minerals, and B complex is always talked about. So the B vitamins are really important for hair fiber production. And biotin, B7 is obviously a part of that B complex. And so I'm a huge advocate for biotin. I've seen and measured the improvements in our patients. Not every single person gets an improvement with biotin, but many folks do. And so, a lot of derms are like, biotin, that doesn't work. Well, they never measured it. So I don't know. Maybe if you treat somebody with something, you should measure it. And that's what we do.
And that's what we do.
So we have, these nutritional products, which are basically providing the building blocks. And then there's also some nutraceuticals. There are things that we can apply to help you be more resilient to stress. So ashwagandha, I think, is important if you're undergoing a stressful lifestyle. We have the ashwagandha product called Zen Master, which is really nice under the Bauman brand. And there's other things too to reduce whole body inflammation. Curcumin, turmeric, as you know, very, very popular out there. And so, those are some of the things that we look at nutritionally. And then, of course, we move into more, like I would say, medical grade treatments. And that could be medications and potentially laser-like devices. So those are home things. That's your hair homework, right?
Yes.
So whether you use medications for hair regrowth, either topically or orally, laser-like devices that are portable now that you can take home with you to use on a daily basis. Those are both very, very powerful modalities that you can use on your own, and also in conjunction with those nutritional products, let's say, and appropriate hair care, of course.
Right.
So I'm a big advocate for minoxidil for women. Minoxidil was the original Rogaine, as everybody knows.
Yes.
We made it a little bit easier to use through compounded medication. So a more customized prescription compounded version of minoxidil topically can be very, very helpful.
Yes.
We also can put it in a microdose. So we use a smaller microdose in a capsule that they can take daily. And this is also, good for both men and for women. And this is not news, although it came out, in the New York Times in around the time of the pandemic. Everybody was using low dose minoxidil. But as a hair surgeon, we've been knowing about this for decades. This is not something new. But today, very often, it can be a first line approach.
It can. And I think
it has to be custom compounded.
Custom compounded. So it is proven, so the minoxidil does work. But you have to use it forever, yes?
So anything that you do, well, let's back up.
Yes.
Hair loss is a chronic and progressive condition. I mean, unless you are, you had a crash diet and all of a sudden, you're fixing that nutritional intake. For most people, there's some underlying genetic triggers, and that can certainly get worse with time without treatment. And so any therapy or treatment you need to realize is open-ended until further notice.
Yeah.
That needs to be continued over time.
Yes.
Now, in this day and age, we've seen a lot of COVID hair loss. It's an insult to the situation, and it's the spike protein that's produced through COVID or through mRNA vaccination can dysregulate your hair. It can affect your blood flow. It can affect your inflammation status. It can affect your autoimmune conditions. So you have to be very, very careful of these things. Now, it seems like, okay, that would just be a one-time thing, but we have long COVID now. Spikopathy is a big problem, and you can research that on PubMed. I've treated personally over 1,000 COVID-related hair loss patients.
Wow.
And so not necessarily just COVID itself, but also the vaccination, the mRNA. And we know that the spike protein does dysregulate a lot of organ functions, not just your heart and not just your circulation, but autoimmunity as well. I've seen patients who were in remission for many, many years from alopecia areata, which is, the patchy hair loss due to autoimmunity. And, why would someone be okay for 10 years and then all of a sudden with a booster, boom, it's a huge flare up because their immune system got, basically tanked, destroyed from an mRNA. But anyway, those are folks that maybe should not have had a vaccination, for example. But I digress.
That's okay. I'm fascinated by everything you're talking about right now. I actually had a friend who had pin straight hair, got COVID, and her hair turned curly.
That can happen. Things can happen. The hair can change texture because of that, and I wonder, if that has something to do with it. But no. But so we treating COVID is a whole other podcast, obviously.
Yes.
But there's ways to mitigate the hair loss and especially the shedding. So we've talked about the home therapies, medications like minoxidil. Obviously, postmenopausal women can also use anti-androgen therapy like finasteride, dutasteride, those treatments.
Is that an pill? I didn't mean to.
It can be an oral medication like the old Propecia for men.
Yes.
Is still a finasteride oral treatment.
Mm-hmm.
Again, postmenopausal, you don't want to use that in women of childbearing age. But now we can also apply that topically into the scalp as well.
Is one more effective than the other? Minoxidil versus like a finasteride? Have you seen for women?
Totally different. Totally different mechanisms. So there's no rule to say that you can't use both. Very often we use both. Minoxidil, we should probably say, minoxidil is a very potent hair growth stimulator. So if you're having that hair cycling problem, you're seeing what looks like breakage, those shorter hairs, the minoxidil will make the hairs grow longer, thicker, and stronger, like laser therapy will too. Finasteride inhibits the DHT production. So if you're androgen sensitive, the DHT, remember, might be that negative trigger causing the miniaturization. So we want to reduce that DHT at the level of the scalp, topically, or orally, systemically. So those are some
Okay.
great modalities that we often employ. What therapies or treatments or how aggressive we need to be with anti-androgen therapy or what kind of additives to use with
Yes.
minoxidil, that we determine through some DNA testing. So
Yeah.
that's where the testing comes in to fine tune those things.
Yes.
Because Michele, sometimes patients come in, they say, you know what, I tried Rogaine, it didn't work. Well, guess what? About 30% of folks have a bad or non-effect from over-the-counter minoxidil. And it's because they don't have the enzyme that will convert the minoxidil efficiently into minoxidil sulfate, which is the active metabolite. And that we
Yeah.
can elucidate through DNA testing, and we can make an adjustment.
This is so fascinating. Okay, so you talked about nutritional, the supplements, potential
Yep.
deficiencies, getting your protein. I think it's an ashwagandha, like an adaptogen, they call it, right? And reducing
Yeah, for
inflammation.
stress.
Yeah, with
Well, it's for
curcumin.
stress.
Yeah. Oh, it's for stress. That makes sense. I remember getting out of a horrible relationship when I was in college, and I was so stressed, my hair hurt. I remember literally, I'm not kidding, my hair hurt. That's how much, I mean, it was,
Mm,
so it's a thing because I've
yeah,
experienced
for
it.
sure.
Red light caps, is that what, when you said, is it red light that they're using or you're using? What?
We use laser, so it's not
Laser, not,
incandescent light. It's not
okay.
LED. We use the
Yes.
turbo laser cap. Turbo laser cap is a sophisticated medical grade device that's FDA cleared for hair regrowth. This is a little bit different than the ones that you're going to see on Amazon or maybe get at your Medi-Spa.
Yeah.
So they're a little bit more expensive. They have a little bit more diodes and a lot more power and a lot more portability. So the turbo laser cap is really kind of the premium device that we recommend. It can actually be one of your least costly treatments over time because it's just a one-time cost. You get the
Yeah.
good device, make that investment in yourself and in your hair, and you're off and running.
Okay. What about PRP? You mentioned that earlier.
Yeah, so the in-office treatments, the lunch break treatments, PRP has been a workhorse for us for almost 20 years. We've done over
Really?
13,000 PRPs. And so platelet-rich plasma often gets a bad rap out there because people say, oh, it was painful. Oh, I had to go back 3 times. Oh, it didn't really do anything for me. Well, I can tell you, if it was painful, if they didn't measure you, and if you had to go back multiple times in a year, then they weren't really doing the state-of-the-art PRP,
Okay.
unfortunately. So I'm
Okay.
sorry to say that PRP stands for platelet rich plasma. That means high concentration of platelets. Unfortunately, most med spas and some derms actually, and even plastic surgeons are not using the appropriate concentration of platelets.
Mm.
That means that they're mixing or they're producing a PRP that's very weak. And how would you know? Well, if someone says to you, you got to come back 3 times this year or 3 times in a row this month, next month, and a month after,
Yeah.
they are already telling you that their PRP is very weak, but they just haven't told you it,
Right.
straight out to you.
Yes.
So the PRP that we provide has 11 billion platelets. It's 1.5 million platelets per microliter. And how do we know that? Well, I have a device that measures it. So we fine tune the PRP every single time, every single patient, their blood concentration gets measured, and we make sure that we're at that level of optimum PRP before we deploy it. And the other thing
Wow.
we do in the office is that we apply local anesthetic. And so people say, "Oh, yeah, the the dermatologist gave me PRP, but it hurt." And I say, "Did they give you local anesthetic?" Yeah, they put a little bit of schmutz on there, but guess what? That's not how you apply local anesthetic. There's a ring block protocol that makes the scalp completely 100% painlessly numb. And so if you had a painful PRP, you didn't have it done right. Unfortunately, I'm sorry.
Okay. Now, this is
And
helpful.
remember that
Yes.
there's a HPA axis, hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis, just like in your body, there's an HPA
Yes.
axis in every follicle. So if you stress out the follicles with pain, you're most likely not going to get a good result from the PRP.
It's, it's just so fascinating. So talk to us about, so you do the hair transplant. So how long have they been around? And you said a lot, what's changed, in
Mm,
terms of the results and stuff. Like if somebody wanted to like actually go, they've done the home stuff, or I don't know. You said you have almost
yeah.
40% women there. So it seems like women want this too, not
So
just men.
there's one little treatment in between that I want to
Oh,
try to mention
please.
in
No,
before we get to that.
no, I
So
love
we did
this.
mention it previously. It's called transepidermal delivery. And this is an
Yes.
ideal treatment for someone who is having aggressive shedding and also maybe someone who is maybe needle phobic. They don't want to have a blood draw. They don't want to have local anesthetic in their scalp. It just
Yeah.
seems maybe too extreme for them. The
Yes.
TED treatment is a relaxing treatment. It is a lunch break procedure, so you have to come into the office to do it. We use ultrasonic sound waves, that means painless sound waves, to drive high molecular weight molecules through the skin without a needle. And so
Wow.
that treatment contains growth factors and very sophisticated hair growth peptides that are applied to the scalp, all within the about a 30 to 40-minute treatment. Now, that one is not once a year. That one you do have to come in 4 times. So once a month for 4 months, but it has a dramatic effect on shedding.
Yes.
And it also has a very powerful effect on hair growth. Think of it like fertilizer in the garden, just like PRP, getting those follicles to produce better hair.
Okay.
So
Again, all
but
this
if you
is
don't,
ongoing though, yes? Because
yeah,
once the hair is dying, does it die?
well, once the
What do you
follicle is
guys call it?
beyond
What do you call it?
repair,
Yeah,
yeah,
beyond repair.
miniaturized beyond
Miniaturized.
repair,
Yeah. It's not
once it's
coming
beyond
back.
repair, once a follicle is beyond repair, you've tried everything, you still have gaps and openings, you still have low density, you're going to need a hair transplant for those areas.
Yeah.
And so that's where we use this minimally invasive technique today. Not the plugs of old, not the strip harvest with scalpel and stitches, but minimally invasive hair transplantation takes the individual follicular units. That means as little as a single hair follicle at a time, and implants them into the thinning or the balding areas, literally between existing hairs if necessary.
Wow.
But also to create a lower hairline for some folks. Some women are just born with a high hairline and they want to lower it. Some women notice the receding that's happening around menopause. Sometimes they're noticing changes in their eyebrows with age or loss of eyelashes. We can use hair transplantation to fix all of those problems.
Wow.
Sometimes women are noticing that their significant other, their male friend is having a little bald spot. Of course, we can fix those guys too. So don't hesitate to recommend hair transplantation to them either.
Absolutely. And where are any new treatments coming down? Like what's exciting you right now? Can I just tell you, I read some article once about a stool transplant where you grew somebody's hair. I don't know if this was like I don't know if that was the
Well,
intended
that
reason for the
seems,
transplant, but I'm just wondering what's coming down. What's got you excited? I know that does
yeah.
that
So
seems extreme.
I'm not so sure the fecal transplant's
Yeah,
going to be the
fecal.
treatment
Yeah,
of the
the fecal.
future for hair
Yeah,
loss. I'll
yeah,
have to look that one up.
yeah, yeah.
You know,
Supposedly
but
it grew this person's hair back. I was like, what is, I don't know. Anyway.
well, look, the microbiome we talked about at the
Yes.
level of the scalp, the microbiome in the gut is really important. I mean, I have our own line of probiotics, which are specifically tuned for hair growth under the Bauman
Mm,
brand. And those are called the good guys. You see, we have names for each of these, like the recruiter, the builder collagen, the recruiter for stem cells, the
right.
A-list is the vitamins, the hero is biotin, good guys are the probiotics.
Okay.
Zen master is the ashwagandha. But anyway, the point is that, reducing your whole body inflammation through taking care of your gut microbiome makes sense. So let's say
Yes.
you had an inflammatory or autoimmune condition, maybe triggered by one of those things that we mentioned previously. Maybe it's a good idea to regulate or to help out your microbiome. Now, obviously, a fecal transplant is the most extreme way to fix that. Usually that's reserved for
Yeah,
people who are dying.
I'm throwing that almost out comically because
Yeah,
I read that. I was like,
yeah,
what is
but it's
that?
true.
But it's
It
true,
makes
right?
sense.
Yes. And what's coming
There's
down the
probably
line?
a grain
Yeah,
of truth there,
there
Michele,
might be.
probably.
Yeah. Yes.
So, but you asked what has me excited about the future.
Yes.
And, look, the holy grail of hair restoration is hair cloning, right? Being able to duplicate the hair follicle
Mm,
indefinitely. Now, we don't have that technology yet, but there are thousands of researchers around the world that have dedicated their lives to try to figure this out.
yeah.
And so I feel like, eventually we'll get there. Is it going to be another 5 or 10 years? I don't know. But
Yeah.
I do know that medical science is advancing at an exponential pace, and AI may help us get to that hair follicle multiplication endpoint. But for right now, if you want to be ready for hair follicle cloning, my opinion is that you have to bank your hair follicle stem cells. And that's what I did last year. So,
Oh,
I mean,
wow.
I told you a little bit in the beginning of our conversation today that my dad, severe male pattern baldness, he was completely bald by the time he was 40. His dad never met the guy with hair. My mom's dad, severe hair loss by the time he passed on.
Yes.
And I always felt that I'm going to be, dealing with it myself. And of course, the measurements prove I've never had a hair transplant. I fight like hell every day to keep my
You have
hair.
great hair.
I'll say it again. I fight like hell 20 years every single day to keep my hair, but I do have a certain percentage loss. I have nearly 35% loss in the crown zone. So I know that it's changed over time despite my best efforts. Somewhere down the road, I might need hair cloning. And so I don't want to clone my crappy-year-old 75-year-old crappy hair follicles. I want to clone my 53-year-old hair follicles. And so last year, I banked my hair follicles.
This is a thing. Wow. Do you do that at your clinic?
We do.
Wow. This is cutting edge. This is where it's going. Okay.
Yeah, so we take literally the biologic material from the base of the hair follicle, and we send it in a very special container that keeps it in a special solution. So at a low temperature, special solution for transport, and it gets sent to a tissue bank. The tissue bank will examine the biologic material, make sure that it's adequate for storage. They're going to take the bulk of it and they're going to freeze it. So that's good news. And then the rest of it, they're actually going to expand those cells and create, hopefully, some kind of exosome type autologous treatment. That means from my own cells, I'll have some kind of scalp treatment, perhaps, that initially probably will be applied to the scalp, maybe later on as we get some FDA approvals, injected. So those are the short and medium term goals. The long term goal is to have it for hair cloning somewhere in the future.
Oh my God, what would Aristotle think? To go back to where we began. Dr. Bauman, is there anything I didn't ask today that you want to leave the women listening with?
Oh, wow. Well, I guess the most important thing really is that if you're seeing your hair change, don't wait around. The take home message from today is that time equals follicles. And that's what we say in the industry, in the field of hair restoration, because for every moment, every day, week, month, or year that you're not treating the problem, it might be getting worse. And you may not even realize how bad it's getting until you reach a point where you've lost coverage in a particular area. And at that point, you've already lost 50% of the hair density. So time is follicles, take action early, come and visit the website, check out BaumanMedical.com, connect with me with a question. You can go to BaumanMedical.com/ask, just ask any question you want. And I promise I'll respond to you through my team. Obviously, the consultations are available there as well. But more importantly than that, get educated, do your homework, do your research. There's thousands and thousands of pages of information on the website that I've written personally. There's hundreds and hundreds of hours of educational material that you can search up on the site. Everything from news articles to patient stories to how we do certain treatments and procedures, how we evaluate your scalp, how we developed our algorithm over the past 26 years and 33,000 patients. You can see before and afters of, literally 13,000 hair transplants that I've done. So there's a lot of information there. But the point is that time is follicles. Don't wait. I'm here to help you. And even if your scalp is just a little bit itchy, we can fix that too. So, if your scalp is trying to tell you something, it's time to listen.
Dr. Bauman, I love this conversation. It's one that I've been wanting to have on the show because everyone wants to have their great hair for as long as possible.
And they deserve to have
and they deserve that. And it makes us feel good. So this has been fantastic. Other than your website, I'll link all the show notes. In the show notes, I'll link all of the resources where Dr. Bauman hangs out online. All of that will be over at thegoodlifecoach.com or on your podcast player. Thank you so much for your time today. This has been really such a pleasure.
Truly my pleasure to be with you, Michele.
Thank you. Hey, friend, I have one request before we sign off today. If you've gained any value from any of the interviews that you've tuned into, would you take just 1 minute and leave a 5-star rating and review over on Apple Podcasts? It's actually how more women can find the show, and I want to continue growing a community of women who are loving themselves and living full on. So thank you for all of your support, and I look forward to being back with you next week. Bye for now.
This podcast is presented for entertainment and educational purposes only. Any information provided is not intended to be a substitute for medical, mental health, or other professional advice. Seek out your trusted healthcare provider or other qualified professional for all matters dealing with your health and well-being. Any opinions or information provided by a guest are their own and not those of Michele Lamoureux or the company.